I told you earlier in our first invited talk that Jimbela gave that we pinch ourselves to think that somebody who's this busy will take the time to come here and be part of this conference. It's the exact same story with our second invited speaker. We've known Mike Fay for years as part of the Global Connection Project, but we were dreaming what are the most exciting people we could imagine coming here and giving invited speeches, and we're really lucky, blessed that Mike Fay could join us for that. He graduated in 1978 from the University of Arizona and then joined the Peace Corps, working in Tunisia and the Central African Republic. In '84, he joined the Missouri Botanical Garden and completed his doctorate on the western lowland gorilla in '97. He surveyed very large lands by airplane and worked to create and manage the Zanga-Zanga and Nwabake-Koki parks in the Central African Republic and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He's worked for the Wildlife Conservation Society since 1990. And in 2006, Fay and Nichols, who's also a fine fellow, traveled to Zakuma National Park to document the danger poachers create for the world's largest remaining concentration of elephants. And he's testified before Congress, as has our prior invited speaker, about the need to preserve wildlife and habitat. So we're very, very happy to have Mike Fay here. Thank you.
Thanks. So I have a kind of old connection to these guys. Back in 2004 when I did what I called the mega flyover, and I'll show that a little bit later on. I was just coming back to the Geographic after having been in an airplane for a year, and I couldn't hardly even hear anymore. And the Google guys came to the Geographic and said, do you guys have any georeference photos? And folks at the Geographic almost, didn't know what that meant at that point. And that was only 2004, really, and 2005 then. And so I kind of heard about it through the hallways, and stuff. And I said, well, we have, 116,000 little kind of vertical postage stamps that have just come fresh from Africa, and Google Earth was just getting off the ground. So I've been kind of, in association with these guys for a long time. What I wanted to talk about today is the fact that, I'm a conservationist. I'm not a National Geographic guy, and I'm not an explorer, and I'm not a kind of one of those extreme guys. I'm not any of those. I'm a conservationist, and I always have been, ever since I was a kid. And you kind of think, how do you get conservation done? Because it's not what humans normally do. Humans are hunters and gatherers, and they take from nature as much as they can. And I've worked with pygmies long enough to know that even primitive people really have no notion of conservation, and a lot of people, the noble savage thing would say that they do, but my experience with hunters and gatherers out in the woods is they try on that day to get as much as they possibly can and take from nature as much as they can. I don't know what's happening here, but anyway. And so as a conservationist, you're constantly dealing with that phenomenon with every human population on Earth, and I include myself in that kind of species. So through photography and through kind of this outreach or just publicity, I see this kind of layer that exists where people can kind of put it out there. But the putting it out there is one thing, but getting something done is the step that's most difficult. Getting the ink on paper that says this is now a protected area and it's legal and it will always be there. That's the hard part. And I see a lot of the stuff that's coming, that's evolving now into everybody's doing this, into the first stage, but not the getting it done stage. And as there's more and more competition for showing people what's going on, I feel like as a conservationist in Africa, I've seen us drifting away from the getting it done stage. And so it's actually, I'm seeing it's harder to do conservation today than it was 10, 15 years ago. Anyway, I'm going to show kind of a historical, I guess, pictorial work that I've been doing with Nichols for the last 20 years. And Nick, as you saw last night, is the best, as far as I'm concerned, he's the best wildlife photographer on the planet. And I've had the good fortune to work with Nick for a long time. And I spend a lot of time in airplanes, and that's where a lot of the kind of general conceptual framework for what I've been able to accomplish in Africa has come from. But I also spend a huge amount of time on the ground. And when I first started working with Nick in southwestern Central African Republic, he realized that we were at a stage where we were getting deep into the forest and very close to a lot of wildlife that people normally didn't get close to. And for elephants, for instance, we were able to get within meters of elephants in the deep forest and kind of talk to them and stay stationary with them. And you can see from this elephant, she is just kind of like wondering, like, what's going on here? What's this thing kind of talking to me here? And things like bongo that no one, very few people have ever seen, started to be known. And we were able to start talking about these things and really showing the world at large, what we were starting to lose very quickly in the Central African forests. And we transitioned down to Congo, actually Republic of Congo, when I first started working there, the popular Republic of Congo. We found chimpanzees that were completely naive, chimpanzees that had never seen humans before, and they were in areas that were quickly being overrun by logging companies. So the first project that Nick was involved with me was in southwestern Central African Republic. Our first parks were Zanga, and it was a relatively modest proposal, but we had 3 parks we wanted to create. And after working with the government and after working with the U.S. State Department and the president eventually of the country, by 1991, we finally had the ink on paper for Zanga National Park, and that was about 500,000 acres of forest in a country that has lost all of its primary forest in the meantime. So the only place now in the Central African Republic that has primary forest is in the park that we were able to create. And for a long time, we couldn't get that ink on paper. We couldn't get the president to sign it, and I finally had to kind of use extraordinary techniques to get that ink on paper. And I think people often don't go to those extraordinary techniques. I moved to Congo, and we're kind of transitioning into pictures of an area adjacent to Zanga in northern Republic of Congo. And I moved down there in '91 to start working on kind of the second phase of this project, where that forest in Central African Republic, went out to a much more vast landscape. Probably 8 million acres of completely virgin forest, never been logged, no roads, only kind of indigenous Bantu and Pygmy populations. And we started discovering these clearings in the forest that had, we started this project to start monitoring elephants, and we discovered that gorillas were using these clearings extensively to feed. And everybody thought that gorillas didn't ever even go in the water when we started. And the pygmies in this forest were truly, kind of people who didn't know anything about the outside world. They had absolutely no notion of where factories were, how things were produced. They'd never seen cars, they'd never seen roads, they had no idea. Well, in 1999, I started a walk that came after being able to create the Bali No Penis National Park. That was another 1 million acres. But I realized after working in that area for quite a long time that there was this kind of enormous swath from pretty much the Ubangi River all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and logging was closing in on both sides. Logging was very quickly taking very large blocks of this mic is a little bit maybe too close to me or something. And building roads like this where within 3 months they could traverse a block that would take me 2 months to walk across. And when they bisect that with the first road, everything changes. And when they start building log decks like that, and building towns of 5,000, 10,000 people, and bringing that human footprint into the forest and systematically cutting every single large tree out of the forest, obviously it's Armageddon that hits these places. It can't be described as anything else. They empty the forest not only of big trees, but virtually every large mammal that exists in these forests. It's unbelievable how thorough and how complete it is. So in 1999, I started a walk where I walked from pretty much the Ubangi River all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. And the notion was that the only way to really protect any of this forest in the state that we knew it as we started taking a lot of these photos and seeing people like this who are engaged in a dance that has everything to do with real spirits and how those spirits impact their lives in the forest. I mean, these guys were I mean, the difference between natural and supernatural with these guys back then had me almost believing in the supernatural. That's how, and I don't believe in any of that stuff. So Nick was totally kind of behind this project, and he hunkered down for well over a year and helped with all the logistics and planning and getting the money ready and getting us out there. And he would hunker down in various places along where I was walking on this trek that took about 16 months. And we walked nonstop. We never left the trail. We never slept inside. We never walked on a thoroughfare or kind of human footprint unless we had to. And we pretty much bushwhacked through these 12 blocks all the way to the coast. And after that walk, you kind of think, okay, it was a great adventure, and the world kind of paid attention, and people were thinking, oh wow, that's really cool, And a lot of people still say to me, hey, you're the guy that walked across Africa. Wow, that's cool, And it is cool, and I love walking, and I die if I can't walk, for a month or two, and I look uncomfortable there. But the pygmy had a raincoat, but they didn't wear the raincoats during the rain because they didn't want to wreck them. So it's kind of like they'd wear them for days and days and days in the dry season. As soon as it rained, they'd take them off and put them in their bag. But you think, okay, that's great, we did this walk, but where's the ink on paper? There is no ink on paper. And there could very well not be ink on paper. I could just go off to some new adventure, and I could say to the world, look at what's happening, and this is terrible, and we need to do something about it, and everybody needs to mobilize, and what everybody says. And yet, ink on paper is the hardest thing. So if you stay behind and you start working with the governments, and you start working with local people, and you start promoting this thing internally, and you start getting to a place where you can show, and this is what happened in the case of Gabon, I was able to show these images to the president. And after about 10 minutes of looking at pictures, I was sitting in a hotel room with him, and he just got kind of drawn into the computer screen, and he started kind of thinking, And then I showed him a map of all of the logging concessions in Gabon. I said, you're not going to have any virgin forest left in this country in about 7 years. It's going to be gone. You can forget about it. You can forget about all this wildlife. You can forget about the trees. You can forget about water. You can forget about... And so in that meeting, he said, I don't know what happened there. We'll do it. And sure enough, he said, come back to Gabon. And I was back there about a month later. We gave a presentation to the National Assembly, and within less than a year, we had another 13 national parks created. This thing crashed. For some reason. There we go. That's Tomoaki Nishihara. He was the logistics guy on the transect, and he kind of did the antithesis of the transect. He would meet us at every supply stop, and sometimes he would have to walk a week just to get into where he could supply us. So he kind of did his own transect, really. We spent a lot of time in water rather than out of water. And if we hit a river that we couldn't cross, because we had dry bags, we just basically swim. We were kind of amphibious. And there the water's always warm and nice, so it's like, who cares? This is fun. Get it, it's soothing. But Nick is the only guy I know that can really get close to wildlife, and the only guy that really takes pictures of wildlife that isn't used to being taken pictures of. Like, yeah, you can go to the Serengeti and get great pictures of the migration or whatever, but Nick has this ability to get into these landscapes and kind of draw people in. It's one of the huge features we discovered in northern Gabon. It's now a national park. These Inselbergs, no one had ever seen these Inselbergs. No one knew no one went out in this forest. And there wasn't a human. We traversed this. It took me 2.5 months to cross this forest. We didn't see a single trace of humanity for that entire time. Not one machete cut, not one, nothing. Just huge elephant highways and wild, perfect, beautiful, gigantic forest the whole way. With gorillas like that think, wow, what the hell's that? I've never seen something like that. Anyway, we got to the beach after 14 months, did the follow-up work, and sure enough, a year later we had 13 decrees signed, and we had about 7 million more acres of forest that were national parks. Followed up again and started really putting in management structures into these parks, because then I just came back from Gabon after being there for about 7 more months, helping kind of the third stage of really trying to get these parks established. But again, we went back with the Geographic and started doing articles on the Gabon parks, and really trying to make these now national institutions, because ink on paper is one thing, but like people talk about a lot in Africa, there's a lot of paper parks, and so a paper park is better than no park. It's vastly better than no park. But if you've got illegal logging and you've got private deals going on between the president and Indonesian logging companies to take out the forest, well, you haven't really accomplished much. So you really have to create some kind of like national institution and this kind of like national ethos that supports this thing, and really it has to become like part of the roadmap. The next publication of the roadmap that comes out of that country has to have those parks on it, and people in Parliament and Senate and all the people who live in the country have to kind of talk about those parks and know about them. And so that's kind of the third stage of this work. And I think that, once again, going back in with Nick and having him photograph more specifically these Gabon parks, and at the same time interacting with the government, and at the same time having me helping put in the real infrastructure of park management, and hiring people and training local people to be guards, and really starting to develop this ethos of how do you protect, surfing hippos And the fact that these things don't exist anywhere else on Earth. You know, hey guys, you live here, but there's no place else on Earth where elephants come out on the beach. No place else. And you have 90 kilometers of this beach, and it's the last place on Earth where we're ever going to see elephants probably on the beach again. That happens to not be true because they've started to come out in some places in South Africa. And a few other places. But you know, you see over time, you think, you lose a lot of sleep thinking, are these parks just going to drift off into Never Never Land, and are we going to start seeing them erode and start seeing people revolt against them even? You know, and so there's this transition period of 5 or 7 years where you're thinking, you know, are we doing it? And finally, like, you know, the negative article comes out in the New York Times, which did happen, you know, and all of a sudden people at the Geographic saying, you know, what the hell are you getting this into, Faye? You know, this place is falling apart. And I'm like, no, that's just propaganda. But deep down, you have to know that you're not just becoming a liar, you know, because what's really happening behind the scenes is that's in fact what you're seeing. Well, you know, I just came back, and here we are 10 years on, basically, and there isn't a single logging operation in any of those national parks. Well, I shut down a few, but they were very small, artisanal type, but no industrial logging, no mining, no oil, nothing that we feared might happen. And the new president there, it's a new generation, and he doesn't question the parks at all. For him, they are national institutions, and every minister knows that, and Minister of Petroleum, Minister of Mines, and Minister of Agriculture, all of them, they don't question these parks at all. They're just there. They exist. And so I find, you know, you think, okay, we're good now, you know. And the parks in Congo, the same way. Parks in Central African Republic, same way. We haven't been as successful in places like DRC, where people say, oh, well, we've created X number of reserves, you know, not national parks, but reserves. Well, reserves have a very different status, and you can do a lot of things in those that you can't do in national parks. You can't build roads in national parks. You can't log in national parks. You can't, in a lot of countries, you can't do anything in national parks other than tourism. But getting back to, you know, the imagery, that's without the imagery, none of this would happen. None of it would happen. And so I think that's where we really need to go with what we're all talking about, is getting to the point where not only the ink gets on paper, but we actually get to a point where whatever we're trying to make happen becomes a national institution. And I think that's true of climate change. You know, we've had all these gigantic conferences now to talk about climate change and talk about how we need to save the planet with this new gigantic, I mean, you know, Jim's been showing this, like, holy shit, you know, that's insane what's happening. And yet, you know, we haven't gotten to the point where you know, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of people who meet in Copenhagen come out with zero result, you know. And you think, how is that possible, that we've got zero result coming out of those discussions? No real ink on paper, and no action, and no real kind of mentality change by humanity. So that's the president of Gabon. He was obviously the man who made it happen, and I think people give him too little credit for doing what he did, because creating 13 parks like that overnight in the country, where you've already got many tens of concessions inside the areas where parks were created, is difficult. Rounding out the corners, Jane Goodall came to Congo in 2004 because we had a little problem with the Congolese government trying to get one more addition to the national park, the Bali National Park, that we needed another 36,000 hectares. When she was there, we went to go see the president, and sure enough, we got that very critical addition put in, signed, sealed, and delivered. The Geographic just did an article on Google Logo. That's where those naive chimps are, and that was never protected. It was in a different concession when we got one concession as a national park. So even little things like that, you know, you think, okay, well, we got another 100,000 acres put into that thing. In 2004, I went on this flyover where I used this kind of human footprint to document how deeply humans were in every single biome, you know, and that red line, you can't see it very well. I guess you can see it pretty well there. That's our track, and we GPS the whole thing, and we took a vertical photograph of the landscape every 20 seconds, and we kind of looked at it in relation to the human footprint, which that red to green is. And kind of went through biome to biome and took these pictures, which were at that time pretty high tech as far as, you know, like they were directly linked to the GPS, and they're all georeferenced automatically, and I could annotate these photos along the way. And they were high res, you know, much higher res than any other imagery that was available on Google Earth. And Google Earth didn't even really exist. I don't know when they rolled out Google Earth, but it was almost simultaneous with this kind of project. And so we ended up with this kind of, I would say, continent-wide recce survey of where are there great conservation opportunities. This is in Madagascar, in a place that's supposed to be protected. And Madagascar says they're saving their forest. Well, this is logging of primary forest by Indonesians in Madagascar. And you think, God, you know, that ain't protecting nothing. We did a survey of the Sahara Desert. I covered pretty much the entire Sahara Desert. And after about a year of flying around in an airplane, I saw a total of 11 addax. And I saw 0 scimitar horned oryx. Scimitar horned oryx are now extinct in the entire Sahara Desert. And the addax is almost there, but we were able to start a project on addax shortly after our flights, and they're still hanging on in the Termite Mountains in eastern Niger, where we started that project. We went to a place called Zakoma National Park on the flyover, and realized, and this is in southeastern Chad, that this was kind of the last stand for wildlife left in the savannas of the Central African plains, where there was an explorer that came by or was in northern CAR back in the 1890s, and this is a park I worked in Central African Republic in the north back in the 80s, and there's about 300,000 refugees coming from Darfur there now. There's no more wildlife. We did a survey in 2005 that compared a survey we did in 1985, 97% decrease in elephant population from 85, when we'd already lost about probably 90% of the elephants since 1970. So we're dealing with basically virtually no elephants left there. Zakoma was the last little tiny place left. We do have accidents along the way. Our plane, that was a wind, just a thunderstorm that came up and blew that 206 over and destroyed our airplane. That was not good. So in the aftermath of the flyover, I kind of identified southern Sudan and southeastern Chad as the two greatest conservation opportunities I saw where nothing was happening, in countries where people don't work. People don't go there. And we went back to Chad in 2006, and this was the place where you could see more elephants in a single herd than any place on the continent. More than 1,000 elephants in a single frame. And the bad thing was, it was most of the elephants in the entire park. Well, we started doing aerial surveys there. We started working with the managers there, and in 2006, I don't know why these annotations are coming, but they are. And started a geographic project on trying to show, again, the world Zakoma National Park. And it's bothering me that these things are there. I'm using, I'm late. Yeah. So we worked in Zakoma for about 6 months, and what happened was we started to realize that while there was this unbelievable kind of array of wildlife, and Nick did some amazing things with camera traps there, we started seeing that elephants, small elephants, were being eaten by lions. And we started realizing that people were poisoning water holes and killing mother lions. And we started realizing that poaching was pretty much out of control. And that wasn't something we knew before we went there. So since 2006, I've been working in Zakoma, and we have just gotten, in the last few months, a management contract from the Chadian government to take over the management of Zakoma National Park, and I think that that's a very positive result that we had from the flyover, as well as Sudan. We went into southern Sudan in 2007, and everybody, including the old administrator from USAID, who said, "I've been working in southern Sudan for 25 years, I've never seen a wild animal." That's what he said, it's a quote. And we go there, we do an aerial survey, we discover 1.3 million antelope. And it was unbelievable. I've never seen wildlife stream under the airplane like you felt like it was a lemming kind of exodus, you know. And so we've been successful in starting up a pretty comprehensive conservation presence in southern Sudan in the last 2 years, where there hasn't been any conservation activity in over 20 years, and we've got a whole kind of array of new parks that are probably going to be created there, and new environmental stuff that really needs to be done. I'm not going to talk about the redwoods because, you know, we saw that last night, but I just wanted to show you some, I'll finish here, some pans and some just mosaics that I've been playing with of the southern Line Islands, and I've been working with the Geographic on this project they're calling now Planet Blue, I guess. Is that what its current name is? Mission Blue, sorry. And we did a survey in the southern Line Islands on these uninhabited islands, some of the most amazing places that I've ever been in my life. And I took hundreds of these panoramic views, but I haven't stitched very many of them, but I was the terrestrial guy, so I got to spend like 2 months just alone on these islands, walking around, exploring them on places where people don't go. So hopefully we'll also be creating tons of marine protected areas in the next few years. Thank you.